Dan, I'm gonna play Penobscot welcome song for
Good.
people. Okay.
Absolutely.
This is by Kelly Demons, who's a Penobscot singer. There you go, Penobscot welcome song by Kelly Demons.
Thank you very much. And we'll get started now. Good evening and welcome to the University of Maine's Hudson Museum panel on anthropological perspectives on diversity and inclusion. I'm Dan Sandweiss. I'm a professor of anthropology and climate studies at the University of Maine, and I'll be moderating this panel. I'd like to start by thanking the sponsors for this event, the University of Maine's Cultural Affairs Distinguished Lecture Series, Anthropology Department, College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, and Hudson Museum. We're all connecting from the lands of different peoples, and I ask that everyone take a moment to reflect on this. I would like to read the University of Maine's land acknowledgement since we are hosting this event. The University of Maine recognizes that it is located on Marsh Island in the homeland of the Penobscot Nation, where issues of water and territorial rights and encroachment upon sacred sites are ongoing. Penobscot homeland is connected to the other Wabanaki tribal nations, the Passamaquoddy, Maliseet, and Micmac, through kinship, alliances, and diplomacy. The university also recognizes that the Penobscot Nation and the other Wabanaki tribal nations are distinct, sovereign, legal, and political entities with their own powers of self-governance and self-determination. You've all seen the flyer for this event, so you know a bit about our distinguished panel, whom you can also see here. I'll just name them and give their titles in the order in which they will initially speak. Susan Antón is a Mexican-American biological anthropologist who is the inaugural director for faculty diversity, equity, inclusion, and development in the Faculty of Arts and Science at New York University. Chip Colwell is an archaeologist and the editor-in-chief of sapiens.org. Ayana Omilade Flewellen is a Black feminist, archaeologist, storyteller, and artist who is the president-elect of the Society of Black Archaeologists and an assistant professor in the Department of Anthropology at the University of California, Riverside. Darren Ranco is a citizen of the Penobscot Nation and an associate professor of anthropology and the chair of Native American programs at the University of Maine. The program will work like this. Each panelist will speak for 5 minutes. They will then converse among themselves on the issues that were raised. And then finally, we will open the floor to questions from the audience. If you have a question, please use the Q&A function to send it to us in writing. I will read the questions to the panelists. Please indicate if your question is for a specific panelist or for the panel at large. You can enter questions at any time and we'll take as many as time permits. Please don't use the chat function to ask questions. We will not be monitoring it. And we'll start with Susan.
Thanks so much, Dan, for inviting me to be here tonight. I'm really mostly looking forward to what my other panelists have to say. I'd like to acknowledge from the beginning that I am sitting on the lands of the Lenape here in New Jersey. I reflected a bit on the question that you asked us to think about, which was diversity and inclusion in biological anthropology. And because I have a hard time following rules, I may not speak for 5 minutes, but I wanted to raise a few issues that come to my mind around this. And I think that they come particularly from the space in which, that I sort of inhabit in terms of how I think about the world. So I'm an evolutionary biologist. I'm a biological anthropologist, paleoanthropologist. And so I spend most of my day thinking about structures that we don't see and how those influence the outcomes and constrain outcomes that we do see. And as such, I come to this issue of diversity and inclusion as a structural issue, as something that requires structural and systemic efforts to change and to put in place. So, for example, if I'm studying, human evolution, our skeletons are put together in a way that makes walking bipedally almost something that we don't think about, at least in certain circumstances. But if we were walking bimanually, we would have to make a lot of compensations just to get from one place to another. And that's entirely predicated on the structures that are kind of underlying and invisible. And so the work that I try to do, which I think coincides with the work of a good teacher, is to try to make the invisible visible, right? And I'm paraphrasing from, I believe it was Laura Nader who said that in a lecture when I was a young graduate student. So when we think about diversity and inclusion, I'm hoping we can have a conversation on several levels, right? So we started within the American Association of Physical Anthropologists thinking about diversity and inclusion from the point of view of who is practicing the discipline, right? Who are the practitioners? Who are the people who are doing the work, and how do they feel about how included they feel in the field? But there are other levels that we could think about it at. So levels of publics, right? So what are the practitioners bringing to their classrooms or to the public? And because I sit within biological anthropology, where we did a lot of the codifying and the scientizing of concepts of biological race, we hold a great deal of sway over the conversations around how race continues to be sort of biologically constructed in the public, and therefore I think have a lot of responsibility for stepping into the conversation to take that apart and to explain how race can have embodied consequences, even if it is coming from a social place. And all of our science could work towards that. There's another level that I think it would be great for us to talk about, which is to what extent are we equitable and inclusive of the communities with which we work? And, Ayana's spoken to this a great deal. And I think we have more work to do there within biological anthropology. We started, or I started at least, thinking about sort of diversity and representation, but that's just the very, very tip of the iceberg of where we need work, because it's not just about getting people in the room to do the same old thing, right? It's about getting people in the room and then listening to different perspectives and deconstructing who we have been giving power to. And it's about creating structures in which there's sort of true belonging and true growth, and thinking kind of across identities and across intersections. And so depending on which of those levels you're talking about and which of the pieces, there's a lot of different things. You could be doing something really right in one space and being a real problem in another space, right? And so I think for me, the most important thing to try to take away from the conversation is to try to sit with a growth mindset where there aren't some of us that are right and some that are wrong, although I'm pretty sure I know the people that are wrong, right? And I'm right. But that there is always space for growing and getting better and being more inclusive and being more equitable, and that whatever you are in that moment, that's what you are, and you can move in another direction. And so as I'm having conversations in different spaces, it's trying to figure out how to best communicate inclusivity, how to best get a message across, but also how to reflect on where in those conversations I'm being part of the problem, right? So if we think about biological anthropology, I would say, like, over the last 15 years, we're in a much better space than we were 15 years ago. And in some places we've made some real advances towards trying to be more equitable and inclusive. But I would also say that we have a really long way to go, and that it's quite uneven, and that everybody seems a little bit inclined to want to check a box, right? And to say, okay, did that. I'm a good person now, and I'd like to just suggest to everyone that it's a much longer conversation, and that the most important thing I think that we can do is to put in some structural frameworks from which we can build, and to which we are accountable every single day, and to hold each other accountable every day. And so in the question and answer, I can give some examples of things that our organization has done. But I loved what you said before everyone got on, which is that we all have our own work to do, right? And that should be ongoing. So I'm just going to stop there and let the other panelists.
Thank you, Susan. Chip.
Great, thank you so much. I am zooming in from Denver, Colorado, and Colorado is the ancestral homeland of 48 tribes that are now spread across the Rocky Mountains, Great Plains, and American Southwest. So I thought I would begin tonight with just a few remarks talking about the distance that we have yet to come. The very first Native American archaeologist, Arthur Caswell Parker, tried to enter the field, started his career around 1899 and successfully got a foothold in 1903. And so here we are, 120 some years later. And according to the Indigenous Archaeology Collective, there are 33 PhD archaeologists who self-identify as Native American. And according to the Society of Black Archaeologists, there are about 74 African-American PhD archaeologists today. And that's out of, we don't have a exact number, but there's minimally at least 1,500 PhD archaeologists in North America. So these are tiny percentages of the discipline. So over the course of a century, the discipline has made very little space, almost no space really, for Native American and Black archaeologists. And of course, there's more than just PhD archaeologists, but I think that's a pretty good measure of the work that we have to do. And this is in a field that, especially we're talking about North American archaeology, that is intensely focused on Native American issues. To get a sense of this, I looked at last year's American Antiquities, the flagship journal of the Society for American Archaeology. And by my count, 62% of the articles, including book reviews, focused on Native American issues. So you have Native American PhDs in the field representing about 1% of the field, and 62% of the articles are about Native Americans. So we have Native Americans as subjects, but not as participants in North American archaeology. A colleague, I think, offered a pretty apt but stinging metaphor when she said that archaeology is like a women's rights organization run by men. That essentially we are a discipline advocating for the protection and preservation and understanding of Native American history with very few Native Americans. And that applies to other groups that have been historically marginalized as well. And to Susan's point, that's very much, it's about participating within the profession, but it's also including the communities that are the subjects of our discipline's research. So to echo Professor Anton's comments, I think this conversation should very much be steered towards structural change. And I'd like to maybe ask kind of 3 questions of the panel that might provide some discussion, or I guess, or at least these are answers that I'm looking for. And so I would love everyone's input, on these questions. And the first is, how do we shift the disciplinary pipeline? Clearly, this is a broken system. It is not working. We have a sample size of 120 years. It's not working. We have to fundamentally change the way people become archaeologists. So what does that pipeline look like? What do we have to do to construct a brand new pipeline for the field? I think the second area for us to look at is economics. Let's follow the money. Where should we be putting the money right now within the field? And that includes funders, of archaeology and anthropology and the social sciences, humanities, but also within our own institutions. How much money are we really putting towards these efforts, and what should that look like in the years to come? And then thirdly, what does it look like not to just include Native American perspectives, the perspectives of Black archaeologists and other historically marginalized community members, as how do we include them as colleagues and professionals, but also how do we create a different kind of culture so that there is actual space within the discipline to include different methods, different perspectives, different theories, different ways of understanding and being in the world. I think if you look at, for example, Arthur Parker's career, he between being an archaeologist or being a Seneca. And for many years, it was impossible for him to bridge those worlds. It really wasn't until the very end of his career, and it was only then because he held such a esteemed senior status within the field. And so I think that's part of the problem today, is that we are often forcing, say, a young Hopi graduate student or college student, or anyone else from minority communities to decide, either I am representing the interests of my communities or I'm a scientist, because being a scientist means, by definition, in some practices, to exclude those communities' interests, questions, values, and so on. So how do we fundamentally reshift the culture within the discipline? So with that, I look forward to the conversation about the work ahead of remaking archaeology for a better world.
Thank you, Chip. Let's go on to Ayana.
Hey everyone, just to reintroduce myself, my name is Ayana Omilade Flewellen, and I'm the co-founder of the Society of Black Archaeologists, as well as a board member of Diving with a Purpose. And thank you so much, Dan, for curating this space. And thank you, Susan and Chip, for your already amazing comments. And I look forward to diving deeper into them. As Chip pointed out, the number of practicing archaeologists who are of African descent is extremely low in this country. Just to put it into further sort of context, especially from the Society of American Archaeology, their needs survey, about roughly less than 1% of all practicing archaeologists are of African descent here in the United States. And then if we spread that out more globally, you see that in Canada, 90% of archaeologists are white, 4 are either Black, Indigenous, or Hispanic, and 6 are biracial. And then in the UK, 97% of archaeologists are white. So we can see that while we're focusing here on the United States, that this is a global conversation in regards to how our discipline is practiced here in North America, but also around the world. So just giving a bit of background on the Society of Black Archaeologists, which is really addressing this issue around diversity and inclusivity at its forefront. It was founded in 2011 by myself and Justin Donovan, who is an assistant professor at the University of California, Los Angeles. And he was a graduate student at the time at the University of Florida, and I was a senior undergraduate student at the University of Florida at the time. So really just speaking to how oftentimes the the spaces of change really start with students who are coming into this space and really desiring to experience something different and to really breathe life into other possibilities for ourselves, but also for other people who are following after us, as well as the elders whose work we really rest atop of. So I just wanted to read the mission of SBA. And its mission really centers on the histories and material cultures of global Black and African communities and archaeological research. And it provides a strong network, mentorship, and educational access. The SBA really works to resolve the ongoing systemic exclusion of Black and African scholars and communities from the field of archaeology. And the SBA aims to provide avenues of engagement and training that will prepare Black and African scholars and communities to be active participants in the documentation, excavation, preservation, and interpretation of Black and African heritage. And the work that SBA is trying to do, which is what Chip and both Susan have spoken to, is really attack the issue of diversity and inclusion from a multitude of angles, and really thinking not only about how we include more folks of African descent within this field, how we also include communities that are impacted by this work in this field, center them in this field, and actually provide them the tools to do this kind of work on their own. And then also thinking more broadly about the epistemological foundations of our field as well, and how we can expand that outward. And a lot of the work that Justin and myself, as well as Dr. Alexander Jones, have been doing has really been thinking about how we can include Black studies and ethnic studies into the field of archaeology, really thinking about how we theoretically engage with the past and how we can really situate that in the present, to think about how this work impacts and shapes how we're conceiving of diverse futures as well. So I'm really looking forward to thinking about the many angles in which we can attack this issue around, what we're not only just doing in our personal lives, but professionally, how we're engaging our work, how we're designing our projects, and how we're thinking about disseminating. And then also really peeling at these questions that Chip is really trying to pose, really thinking about this disciplinary pipeline. And the last piece I'll say is really thinking about how the work of Diving with a Purpose, which is a nonprofit organization dedicated to oceanic conservation and submerged heritage resources, is really thinking outside the box of maritime heritage preservation work. And they're an organization comprised of advocates who are not formally trained archaeologists who've been doing work with the National Park Service, with NOAA, to really think about and uncover, as well as the Smithsonian, to think about and uncover the history of the transatlantic slave trade, focusing on African diasporic histories. But what's really ingenious about the work that they're doing is that it's outside of academic spaces, and really thinking about how the pipelines that we need to create sometimes do not function inside of academia, and can really thrive beautifully once again when they're placed in the hands who live areas every day. So I'm looking forward to being in dialogue.
Thank you, Ayana. Darren.
Thank you so much, Dan, for including me, and thanks to the other panelists for their real thoughtful. I feel like I don't know if I have much to add to what I think is a really great baseline of challenges. Also, Dan, I didn't know if you know this, but I'm not an archaeologist, so I know you know that. So I am a sociocultural anthropologist, and I am here in Dedham, Maine, in my own homeland of the Penobscot Nation, although I am on the east side of the river, which makes me a little bit nervous as having grown up on the west side. I will say, I'm obviously speaking as a native anthropologist, but as a white passing native anthropologist. So my experiences are not the same as people with darker skin and women who are also engaged in fighting within these structures to make anthropology a meaningful endeavor to brown and Black people, all not just in the US, but worldwide. I remember, so I went to Dartmouth College. I remember the first native scholars, neither one was an anthropologist. The first native scholars I met were Bruce Dutu, who's still at Dartmouth, and Russell Thornton, both of whom made really important impacts in sort of modeling. I think so one of the takeaways will be the really critical need towards mentorship and this pipeline that Chip brought up, and I'll talk more about that. But of course, I don't exist without the support of non-native scholars. And early on as an undergrad, I had John Watanabe, who was a great influence on me and supported my work. He, as a junior in college, I would walk down the hall and he would be like, "Professor Ranco." So he was really trying to build in the idea that I could do this. So that's super amazing. And also at the time, Colin Calloway was already influencing me. I went to graduate school at Harvard University, and my primary advisor was David Mabry Lewis. And I bring this up, the founder of Cultural Survival, but he also had recruited a number of Brazilian and other and indigenous peoples to be anthropologists at Harvard at that time, starting in the mid to late 80s through the 90s. And there were a number of us who went through the Harvard program, including my good friend Bernie Perley, who's Maliseet, and a whole host of others, Sven Haakonsen, Michael Wilcox on the archaeology side, and Valerie Lambert, and a whole host of others on the cultural side. But he was very much of his day, and I believe he saw anthropology as being better by being more inclusive, but it was ultimately to do the same anthropology. It wasn't to challenge its structures or what it was about, but he definitely felt like, I think in the same lens that drove him to start Cultural Survival, it was a social justice cause, but it was not to challenge the discipline. I've had also very critically Native community supporters from my own tribe, which is a critical part of my own mentorship. Folks like Jim Sapir, the late Jim Sapir, and Jerry Perdilla, as well as Ted Mitchell, who did so much for all of us involved in Native education here in Maine, and then others like John Banks and Mark Chevery. And I know that I don't have much time, but saying these names is important because I'm not here without them. I would say that other Indigenous scholars, starting with the work of Linda Tuai Smith, the Maori scholar, and Ty Alfred, the Haudenosaunee scholar, both of them really painted a way to make, well, not either of them quite anthropologists per se, definitely paved a way to think about what we've tried to do to reshape, as Indigenous scholars, reshape the discipline of anthropology. In 2006, I wrote an article about what this work would look like. It appeared in the Wakajaja Review. And what I likened anthropology in its typical sense was that it was a hunting story, and that people from a home went out into the world and brought something back to this home community, which was the academy. And I just said, for a Native anthropologist, this dialectic is quite different. It is either a reverse hunting story, meaning we're starting from our own community, going to the academy and bringing tools and skills to either defend or make claims with, et cetera, or it's put under erasure entirely, where there isn't a clear set of practices vis-a-vis a hunting story. Maybe it's a gardening story. And I can definitely attest to that. Being in my homeland, doing the work at the University of Maine, it is much more akin to, I know you anthro types all know these archetypes of, hunting versus gardening and the narratives that drive them. So since that time, the work we've been doing is really what we would reference as decolonization or decolonial work within the discipline. And I follow a bunch of scholars, starting with Fanon and all those great anti-colonial thinkers, and then all the way up through Tuck and Yang and their really important essay, Decolonization is Not a Metaphor, and beyond, to basically say what our work is not to do the same anthropology with just Black and brown faces, but it is to really challenge the structures of the discipline, its authorities, and start to transfer that, right? So decolonization for Tuck and Yang, and pretty much any of us that are doing it, it is meaningless without structural changes, authorities changing, literally authorities changing. It is not just beautiful words, it is structural change. Now, that is really difficult work, but I think here at the University of Maine, and I am not alone in this work, we are super lucky. I am not even the only Penobscot scholar in my very small department here at the University of Maine. So the fact that we are able to engage in our place-based work in a variety of levels, and she's the archaeologist, of course, Bonnie Newsome, who's been doing this work in amazing ways through the lens of archaeology. And structurally at the University of Maine, this is, we do things like memoranda of understanding, rethinking the cultural heritage items that the university has that are Penobscot and Wabanaki in general, and thinking about ways to either de-accession or create spaces of more authority through things like traditional knowledge labels and other kinds of interventions within the keepings of Indigenous artifacts and tangible and intangible cultural items. We've also established a campus-wide signage project in our language. So our buildings are identified in our language, which is rooted in place and connection to place, that provides a deeper set of connections for all faculty, all students, all community members. That just sets a tone to remind everyone every day where they are at and on whose land they are learning. And then critically, and this speaks to the pipeline issue, and Bonnie Newsome has done a lot of this work just in a very short time. I've been as faculty just in the last few years in developing Native archaeologists in the practice of her engagements around making archaeological research work for Indigenous peoples. But also for us, we started in 2012, the Wabanaki Youth in Science program called the WAYS program, which really does focus on Native youth in environmental and life sciences, but we always do archaeological units. We find many, our tribal historic preservation officers, Chris Suck-Alexis, Donald Soktoma, and others here in Maine have done a lot of great work in bringing archaeology together with, and this is our pedagogy, with Indigenous science in the same learning space on the landscape. And for Native youth, that has been the critical connection. So in terms of valuing other knowledges in the way that we present anthropological questions, getting rid of the God complex of knower and object and subject, we just do this naturally. I mean, you can do it with we do it with 8, 9, 10-year-olds. Like, they get that their people, their community's knowledge is a critical shaping of the understanding of culture in the past, present, and future. And for us, that program, we have some budding archaeologists. I'm not so, or an anthropologist, but I'm not so tied to that. Honestly, we're transforming a lot of other disciplines along the way to include Indigenous science as a shaper of knowledge in the context of the university. So I'll end there, always with the future, which I am very, very hopeful for.
Thank you, Darren. I'm going to open the floor to discussion among the panelists. I know everybody mentioned, logically enough, and Darren, you certainly ended with this, the need for structural change. And perhaps in your discussion, I know several of you suggested that you might have some suggestions for appropriate structural change. And it would be very useful to hear about some of those as part of your discussion. The floor is yours.
I was thinking of that as well. And
Yeah,
Professor
please,
Antón,
no,
actually,
go. Please,
I was going to
Chip.
say, you mentioned it, and so I was curious of the examples that you had. Maybe that would be a good place to kick us off.
Sure, happy to, and welcome back, Ayana. We were missing you. So you posed 3 questions, and I thought I'd just jump in on the first one because it's also the one that Darren ended with, which is the pipeline question. And I think one's a sort of a philosophical position, which is, constantly in my work, I'm getting the notion that, well, it's a pipeline problem, which translates to it's a pipeline problem that I can't do anything about. So, quit bothering me to try to find it in my, search applications or whatever. So fundamentally, the belief that you can build pipelines. One of the things that we've been doing for, I guess, about 10 years now, is to, you start with an assessment. All of you actually put out the data on, sort of what does representation look like within your fields, and how far do we have to go. It's, nearly as bad in biological anthropology. So nothing to be proud of there. The first thing that we did was to do a program survey across bioanth programs to figure out where we were losing people. Did we actually have them in a college pipeline to start out with? And it turned out that sort of contrary to what we had anticipated, that we actually had really great diverse undergraduate majors in bioanth, right? Which is, we actually expected to be the least diverse of the subdisciplines. And that as you went up rank, as you went to master's programs and PhD programs, and then finally into faculties, that, that pipeline leaked pretty excessively. And so one of the things that we did to build pipeline was to, in our national organization, start an undergraduate research symposium, where we were actually focusing undergraduate researchers, bringing them into their own symposium before our meetings, hooking them up with graduate school mentors, and giving them a little bit of funding to sort of print their poster or what have you, right? Along the lines of what you spoke to, Darren, if you can see it and see that pathway and imagine yourself in it, that it's easier to do that. So that's one of the pipeline things that we're doing. And then the second is that we've gotten, we do what we call Increasing Diversity in Evolutionary Anthropological Sciences. It's an NSF funded program that runs as a day-long sort of science and cohort building program the day before our national meeting. So it creates a space for, in this case, we're explicitly focused on underrepresented minority scientists and scholars, to create a space around what are the difficulties of sort of living and working in this space, but then also what's the really cool science that you're doing, and what was your path to kind of do that mentorship back and forth. And the kind of cool thing that happened with that is that we were focused on students, but the thing that it ended up doing was creating a network for faculty, right? Because there's also this further pipeline issue, right, of actually surviving in the academy. And everybody, it's like happily ever after, right? You've got it made once you get a tenure track job, and then you don't, and then marriage is hard. So that there were unintended consequences. So that's those are a couple of things that we did on pipeline.
I can also add to the pipeline conversation, thinking about the work that SBA is doing. One of our flagship programs is the Estate Little Princess Archaeology Field School project, which, in large part had seed funding from the Smithsonian's African American History and Culture Museum, and received funding from the University of California's HBCU initiative grant, all of which provided the space to train high schoolers on the island of St. Croix in archaeology, and actually get them in the ground and in the dirt with us, that, mirrors the curriculum that is currently on island in history and in earth sciences. And then through the UC HBCU initiative grant, we've been able to actually recruit students from HBCUs to come down to St. Croix to do this archaeological field school with us for 5 weeks, that provides them with a $3,000 stipend that really gets at this conversation around economics and feasibility, because oftentimes, typically when we're thinking about providing scholarship opportunities to students, it still doesn't cover the fact that many students who cannot afford these spaces also have other financial obligations that they can't leave back at home. And the stipend is hopefully to aid in that decision-making process. And it also provides them with graduate school application waivers to any University of California school, and then provides them with funding for 4 to 5 years, depending on the institution that they are accepted into. So really thinking about what a concrete sort of program is that builds institutional ties to HBCUs to really provide students with educational opportunities that they ordinarily would not be introduced to, primarily because not many HBCUs even have anthropology programs. And if they do, like Spelman, for instance, Spelman College, or the former anthropology department that was at Howard, they tend not to focus on archaeology. The exception is that Howard had a really robust archaeology program at one point. So that's really the kind of work that SBA is doing. And then more informally, we have the networking on the back end that really provides archaeologists this networking space to share with each other what is and isn't working on the 10-year track. We have writing groups with one another. We have experimental workshop spaces where folks are sharing their research. So all the ways that we sort of think about mentorship that you know, it seems kind of small, but being able to have, you know, this space of intellectual working.
Uh-oh. I'm going to fill in and say it doesn't seem small at all. It's actually huge, and I was really excited to hear about the writing groups.
That comment around mentorship and that sort of networking, I mean, that reflects, Professor Ranco, your comments, right, around, I mean, your acknowledgement of your networks and your ancestors and those who help guide you. I mean, that seems just pivotal, maybe, to all of this.
Yeah, no, and I think, you know, it's we need, of course, and I don't know if Ayana wants to finish her thought. I just want to go on.
No, please continue. I'll hop in.
Okay. I mean, I think, you know, it's building programs requires, you know, whatever, you know, I'm not up on the language. I know ally isn't exactly the right thing. Collaborators, you know, mischief makers across Black and brown and white folks working together. But I honestly believe you know, and I still get this, and I'm always surprised that social scientists, when they think about awarding resources. I know we're tied to other places, but you know, they will refer to the meritocracy and the deficit models when talking about brown and Black scholars, future scholars, and they know it's total BS. They know that the meritocracy, I mean, they're social scientists. They must know that this research shows that there is nothing true about an SAT score besides a reflection of a middle-class white lifestyle. So we just need to be more diligent in our mischief-making friends and fighting back and from within the discipline. Again, I feel very lucky at the University of Maine that we have these collaborators, but I would just say that, you know, that reaches beyond our departments. We face structural changes around that. And as much as I use the word pipeline, we all know that, you know, pipelines do the devil's work. So I'm not gonna, maybe we can talk about it as pathways or something. But I just wanna say, you know, that focus on the structural change, letting go of the elements of the meritocracy, which are really gatekeeping elements, and letting go of the deficit models as we engage with brown and Black communities through our work as anthropologists.
For me, that's already one big
Stories
takeaway
are,
of this,
yeah.
of this conversation is maybe to do away with the metaphor of the pipeline, which I introduced, so I'll take that back, you know, but it's so true, right? I mean, pipelines are these closed systems, right, that just go from point A to point B, and they often go like over tribal lands, you know, without actually serving, you know, tribal communities. So, you know, maybe we definitely need a new metaphor that will make us rethink about how to be more inclusive. I think one thing I was going to add as well is just to emphasize even more work that the SBA is doing and leading, and Professor Flewellen in particular, in collaboration with a network of archaeology centers across the United States, as well as in partnership with the Wenner-Gren Foundation and the Indigenous Archaeology Collective, and then Sapiens and Cornell. We're looking at the hidden costs of field schools. And the idea here is, right, is to like identify where are the pinch points, where are the points at which you have a lot of people who are interested in archaeology and they get funneled out. And identifying field schools seems to be a really key spot. And so we're actually conducting a survey right now. There might be participants in the webinar. Professor Flewellen, we should probably put the link, find the link, and we'll get it. One of us can pop it in there, because we're trying to find out, you know, what does it really cost? Because you have, of course, the tuition in getting there, but maybe there's also hidden costs around like healthcare, you know, the cost of keeping your apartment back on campus, the opportunity cost of not working because you're not getting paid at field schools, right? So what does it actually cost? So I think this is a really amazing collective effort to identify like where is a key point, you know, that we're losing really great students. And, you know, I think, and the survey is going to be amazing, but the real test, right, is going to be, okay, what's next? So we identify the problems, but how do we really collectively then work towards solutions? So I think maybe that's also to Professor Antón's point around accountability. You know, it's like we can talk the talk, and we often do these things around diversity inclusive to make us feel good, make us feel like we're talking about it and taking action. But a survey isn't action. You know, a survey is just a tool to take action. So it's incumbent upon us to figure out, you know, how to actually address these problems once they're fully identified.
I think it's also worth just, I'm just going to piggyback on something you said, Chip, which is having partial sets of knowledge or partial sets of data is okay to take action, on, right? Because I think the other thing, I mean, I'm now in administration. I think the other thing that sometimes you get stuck on is, well, we don't have all of this information yet. And I think there has to be some effort to it's a sort of an iterative thing, right? You sort of assess where you are, you make a plan, you take action, and then you assess where you are and you make a plan and take action. And that's, it's not, none of this is a one and done, right?
I think especially around when it comes to questions of equity, if we're talking about, you know, race, ethnicity, gender, citizenship, and so on. And I think it's hard to measure at times, right? Because maybe there's limitations about how you can ask people how they identify. And so, and there's complexities, right? And, you know, we just want numbers and be able to achieve numbers. But what happens when you can't put people in a box? So those numbers suddenly get really messy. And that's one thing I've been thinking a lot about as the editor of Sapiens, which is an online magazine about anthropology. And we're thinking about how to be more inclusive in who our writers are, who's writing for the public. And it feels like a stumbling block when you can't measure your own progress or you can't tackle that. So I guess I'm curious for all the panelists, how are you thinking about these questions of measurement? And especially when you're trying to measure things like ethnicity that we know doesn't fit neatly in boxes in an easily quantifiable way in so many cases.
I think something that the SBA is trying to do maybe isn't more so around trying to capture those measures, but capture the experiences. So there's been a shift away from it's not a shift away because we're also a part of the survey effort. We also have we have a survey out to our own members right now to also assess our members' needs. But we also have a really brilliant oral history project as well. That's been one of the projects for SBA sort of since the inception of the organization that is really dedicated to capturing the experiences of people of African descent in this field, from our elder scholars, from like Michael Blakey and Teresa Singleton, who are really at the forefront and foundation of this work, to early career scholars like myself and Justin Donovan. So I think sometimes the lean to include also the qualitative is really important in these spaces. And I've also seen a lot of pushback against it. I've seen direct pushback in panels at conferences where people are expressing their actual feelings and emotions about a particular space feeling unsafe, and the response to it being, well, where's the data? As if the oral and the experience is not the data enough. So I think part of it is also being able to really think through how we're valuing certain forms of data in these conversations and really stressing the importance of them. So I think that's part of it as well. And also really, as everyone has been mentioning, pushing away from this notion of a success point. As Susan mentioned, this work is very iterative. And I just, really wanting to stress, because my own department at UC Riverside is like gung-ho about doing this work to combat anti-Blackness in the field. And it's like, this doesn't happen overnight. And if you think it does happen overnight, then you know that you've done something wrong if it's too quick. So it's like the steady progress of it and like the actual long-term impact of it, you're not going to see that overnight. But it's work that needs to be done right now. And it is those steady steps, and it is those really tender conversations. And I think it comes from these spaces. And I'm looking at Chip because of the space that we have with Sapiens and the Indigenous Archaeology Collective and Wintergren and the archaeology centers, having conversations that are tender, that require a slowness to them, because there are these spaces of crossing. So just, I think, keeping that in mind and holding that as our own sort of measures of success might not reflect what our institutions want to see, but we are making progress.
I love that phrase, Ayana, tender conversations, because they are, and it's hard to not, maybe get frustrated. I guess the other thing, I maybe being on the elder end of this now, that I want to throw out is that we need also to think about making space for kind of the younger generation coming up, for other people to do the work. I mean, in some ways, having succession plans in place for, it's great to have structures, but you want to have structures that will continue, and structures that continue rely on having, on being well built, but also having succession plans. And that's something, it's probably just a piece of my age that's something that I'm starting to think about it, as you've fought so hard to get, certain things in place. You also have to be sort of evaluating every day, what am I willing to give up, right? Like, what piece am I willing to step back from and actually trust that that this stuff that I've built doesn't necessarily need to go forward in exactly the way that I've imagined it, because maybe that's not the only way to imagine it. And so that's part of being in, kind of in this growth cycle, I think, is to always be sort of mindful of where you are on it. And if we're lucky, then the next set of folks coming up is going to be way beyond us, right? And we are maybe going to be, sort of part of the problem, right? In some fashion, and need to be, willing to, to hear that and move on that.
Well, we have 3 questions from attendees that perhaps we could address those for a while. The first is from Cheryl Coffin, and she asks, how do archaeologists reconcile potential indigenous cultural barriers or taboos to archaeological excavations versus exploring sites to uncover new information? That's open to everybody.
Sky wants to answer that. I see this. This is great.
And that was, I think, to the entire panel. So,
Sky, did you want to say something? I don't know.
No, I hit that button not realizing that it would say I wanted to answer it. Darren, go ahead.
I mean, I think as in terms of a practice, again, I'm not an archaeologist, but I think the reconciliation has become increasingly easy. You don't engage in excavations that would violate any of the cultural norms of the peoples whose space you're working in. I'm sure there are dilemmas faced by archaeologists especially in work that, CRM work where things will be eroded. But I think even there, working with local people to find the best way to either preserve, rebury, do their cultural preference as it relates to the things that might be discovered through cultural resource management kind of response. I'm sure you all have better answers than I do.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna add that it's exactly as Darren was mentioning, just really thinking about, once again, returning to this phrase around tender conversations and tender collaborations. And I know that the question was specific to Native American populations, but I feel like it's valid to all historically marginalized experiences in our country. And I'm thinking, especially with me being on the West Coast, Japanese internment camps, the work being done around historical East Asian communities, and as well, thinking about the work that's being done now to pass the African American Burial Ground Act through Congress. Like, there are very real ways that from the inception of a project, the communities that are impacted by that work need to be involved in the structuring of research design. And as Darren pointed out, cultural resource management firms are federally mandated to do this kind of, I should say, of collaborative work with federally recognized Native American tribes. And you don't have that for non-federally recognized tribes. You also do not have that for other historically marginalized populations like African Americans and also like East Asian populations, as I mentioned, throughout California. So I think that, the answer to the question is that if the work that we're doing is in service of the communities that are impacted by this work, which I feel like it should be, then projects don't progress without their consent and without their collaborative desire for that work to take place. And that is a slow process, like that process of actually building relationship, understanding with a community to even get at what sorts of work they've done around, what sorts of work they have already done around heritage, how they've already imagined their cultural heritage, and then also what they want to see done for the future. And oftentimes it doesn't reflect what our institutions value for us to keep our jobs. So a lot of the work that we're doing in St. Croix, folks, we're involved with a lot of artists down there. We've had a teacher that wanted to figure out how to implement this in a theater sort of class that she's doing with students. fantastic work. That's not going to be recognized by my department, but it does serve the community that I'm doing this work in. And it also provides an alternative framework to think about how we disseminate this information. So just a couple of pointers forward is really thinking about, for archaeologists, what community engagement and community collaborative research really looks like in praxis in your locale.
Go ahead.
Okay. I think I have a slight delay. Yes, everything said, and a few additional thoughts. I mentioned Arthur Caswell Parker, the first Native American archaeologist, and your question is actually precisely the conundrum he faced in the summer of 1903. He finally got his own dig, and he headed off to the Cattaraugus Reservation, where he was born and raised. And he was there with Mark Harrington and under the auspices of Harvard Peabody Museum. And they were so excited, right? Parker, finally he made it big time. I'm on my way to being a professional archaeologist. And their goal was to get as much good stuff as possible. And so you're an archaeologist, 1903, you want to get the good stuff, where do you go? You go to the burials, right? So Harrington and Parker start digging up the burials at the Silver Heel site on the reservation, and within a week, we know from letters that Harrington sent Putnam, who was overseeing the excavations at Harvard, and Harrington says the elders in the community are objecting to us digging up their ancestors, digging up bones. Can you please send us a permit and make it look as fancy as possible to impress the Indians that what we're doing is not illegal? And Parker, so imagine Parker, right? He's on the cusp of making it big as an archaeologist, something he dreamed of for years. And now his own community, his own elders are telling him to stop doing this work. And so he had to choose, am I an archaeologist who digs up the dead, or am I a Seneca who respects my ancestors, right? It's an impossible question for, at that point, 23, 24-year-old, early the first Native American archaeologist to try to navigate. So the question goes to the heart of, how do we create a discipline that doesn't make people choose between being true to their culture and their community and being a scientist? And there are emerging models. We can look at what is called Indigenous archaeology, collaborative archaeology. I might point out that the Dene in the Four Corners region of the Southwest, they have very strong cultural prohibition against being close to the deceased. And yet they have one of the largest tribal heritage programs in the country. So even tribes themselves have found ways to navigate, these conflicting interests. I'd finally just point out that, I also think it's a bit of a false dichotomy. We have this idea that Indigenous people have cultural barriers or taboos about excavating the dead, but actually, almost all of us do, right? I couldn't head over to Fairview, which is Denver's largest cemetery, and just start digging up any grave I want. I'd be arrested and thrown in jail, right? I couldn't just go to Italy and just start digging up the Colosseum because I find it interesting, right? Italy, it's a sovereign nation, and tribal nations are nations as well with their own sovereign rights. So I think, we recognize and put limits. We recognize the rights of nations to restrict scientific practices that fit their cultural norms. We just don't apply it equally, right? We don't apply it equally to Indigenous peoples and other communities. We expect there's a difference between how, white dominant society is treated and their ancestors are treated, and how Native peoples and other minoritized communities ancestors are treated. So, I think it's also helpful to kind of get away from the dichotomy altogether and acknowledge that we always put limits on science. Science is always being negotiated around what is ethical, and we need to expand that so that it's more fair and equal across all communities.
Yeah, and let me just sort of jump on that as well. So the other side of what we normalize as important, as qualifying, as meritorious, as being related to whether you advance or don't in in your discipline, you know, that's because a bunch of people earlier on decided that those were the things that we were going to score and care about. And so, you know, one of the other pieces from an internal perspective is to think about, so how are disciplines changing? What is valued in terms of scholarship in those disciplines? How do we evaluate that for its, you know, sort of its value and its worth, so that something that is working towards an end that we're looking towards, like the fabulous performative pieces that Ayana was just talking about, do end up counting when you get to a tenure and promotion committee, or even before that when you get to a hiring committee. So those are all conversations that should also be iterative, right? Just because we have it set up in this particular way that you need these kinds of publications and these kinds of outlets, doesn't mean that it must be that way forever. And so there's a bit of a responsibility, or maybe a large responsibility on everybody's part who's got the privilege of sitting in those positions already, to push that envelope and say, no, I do see merit in that, and this is the way that we define excellence here. And you know, there's a whole network of things that go into making a tenure packet, for example, or evaluating an application. And so that's another set of norm changing that we have responsibility to work on.
I could just jump in for a minute and follow up on that. A few years ago, the SAA, the Society for American Archaeology, actually had a panel or group task force that put together guidelines for tenure and promotion for archaeologists that can be shared with departments making those decisions. They began to wrestle with some of these issues, certainly the multiplicity of ways in which we now make our work available to audiences and to the different kind of audiences. But even though it's only about 3 or 4 years old, I think that what I'm hearing is what's really should be a call to revise that document and to bring it up to date with the kind of things that are being discussed here. So I just, since some of you are members, it might be worth writing to Deb Nichols, our incoming president, and suggesting that that might already be revisited. All right, let me go to the second question. Julia Gray asks or says, I would be interested in hearing the panelists speak to what Indigenous and Black archaeologists will be able to find for actual jobs if they make it along the pathway to a PhD, especially for Indigenous archaeologists who want to work in service to their own communities and not move far away.
Well, I'm actually going to try to thread this also with Bonnie's question. So let's see if I can pull that together, and hoping people can also read her question.
Maybe you could read her question out loud. Yeah, so everybody's on.
Yeah, sure. I'll read Bonnie's question, and again, Bonnie is as important a thinker on all this as anyone. Being an Indigenous, this is her question, being an Indigenous archaeologist or anthropologist can be emotionally draining. Can you speak to how you mentor students through tough situations that they may experience when starting out in these fields? I see this as connected to Julia's, simply because Julia is asking about, you know, as anthropologists and archaeologists, as Native people, often the rationale and reasons we wanted to get into it, just like Chip's pal Arthur Parker, is to serve our communities, in really direct ways. And being both mentored and being a mentor too is connected to our closeness to home. I mean, to answer, some of the questions around tenure and what we do as institutions, to really transform that and think critically about our connection to places as, and Dan knows this too, the Look at the Land Grab You website, think about what we're doing in land grant institutions and our legacies and what we owe Indigenous and other peoples. It's not just Indigenous people. To put a finer point on it and to answer Bonnie a little bit more directly, and I know we've had these discussions too, but I think it's so important, it's always first validate, the experience of the difficulties and the quandaries. Part of what Chip talked about with Parker's quandary is that no one had faced that question before him. And that's a very real difficulty, as we are better relations and relatives, and as we are better mentors to our students, a critical part of their alienations need to be validated. And that can only be done through, some real work where if you don't understand your mentee's experience, you need to find a way to do that. So I would say, just as people come to that as mentors. And then the second piece of that, and this is what we're very conscious of, I think, in our anthropology department, but also say in the WAYS program, is how to build a supportive community, one that really imagines and supports success for all sorts of different people. If we just left, we know from the research, if we just left it up to people to just naturally decide who they want to work with, people tend to pick people like themselves, right? So we know that's a structural problem. That's part of the supposed meritocracy that doesn't really exist. So, being very diligent of how mentoring and choosing of people as we bring them into discipline, how we build communities of support for them, and recognize, especially for non-Indigenous and non-Brown and Black anthropologists, your role in building and responsibility to building a community of support for people. So yeah, it also gets back to Chip's question about resources funding. And it sounds like you all are doing this in the context of your work, Chip and Ayana, which I think is amazing. But it has to be done at the local institutional level all over the place to have it make sense.
I can't give an example for working with Indigenous or Black archaeologists, but for Latin American archaeologists, about 20 years ago, the University of Pittsburgh was able to get a very large endowment from the Heinz Foundation specifically to completely train Latin American archaeologists. So 5 years of funding, everything. And universities throughout Latin America are now, their archaeology programs are staffed by the graduates. Many of them are in programs in the US as well. It's been a tremendously successful, it takes money, but with money, it's doable. If you give people a pathway, I'm just reinforcing what everybody's saying, if you give them a funded pathway, many more are going to make it through. It's sort of common sense, but there's an example that's actually worked really well. And I think we need to work for that for other groups as well.
And I was just going to add on in terms of job opportunities. It's a great question because, thinking ahead towards what kinds of jobs are actually available, given the long road it takes to get a PhD, it's good to be planning ahead. There are a number of tribal historic preservation offices around the country. So these are offices within tribal communities that provide guidance on cultural heritage issues. So there are job opportunities there. There's cultural resource management firms, museums, as well as in universities. So, it is competitive, I think in many of those areas, and yet I think there's also a clear demand, for scholars who aren't maybe even just coming from these communities, but have the ability to navigate and work with community. I think that's only going to increase in the years ahead as a key asset and value in the job market, and that someone can bring to the job market, the marketplace. So I would think people who are bringing those skill sets will be highly, highly competitive for many of these jobs across, government, applied sectors, and in academia.
All right, we have just a very few, 3 minutes left. If anybody has closing remark that they would like to make, some words of wisdom for the attendees?
I guess I can start. And apologies again for the in and out with my technology this evening. But I just want to echo, the great points that have been made already, that this work is iterative, and that, it starts with having conversations, and it really pushes its way forward with the actions that we take daily, like in our daily lives, in our communities, in our academic settings, in our department meetings, in our classrooms. What sort of actions are we taking to really do this work? And I also just want to stress that, this conversation has centered on Black and Indigenous experiences and Black and Indigenous archaeological research, and diversity and inclusivity work is so much more broad than that. And there's a lot of work happening right now around how anthropology and archaeology specifically is a very ableist a very ableist foundation, has a very ableist foundation, and our inner workings really push that forward. So I think that there are ways that, being able to take this work of diversity and inclusion intersectionally, that really thinks about the myriad of ways people are coming into our discipline with varying facets of their identity, needs to be at the forefront of how we are imagining a just and inclusive discipline for the future.
That was beautiful, Ayana. And I want to give a shout out to Biba Black and Bioanth. It's just also started up, I think, and at least partly inspired by the work that you all are doing in archaeology. And so thank you also for that. I think while you were offline at some point, you said, well, it seems like a small thing, but it's huge. And so I want to thank you all for what you've been doing, because it's huge.
Oh, we have come to the end of our time, but I want to thank the panelists very much for a really interesting, important, and useful discussion. And I will be in touch with all of you. Thank you again. Have a great evening.
Thanks,
Thank
Dan.
you.
Bye,
Thanks,
everybody.
everyone.